بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صاحب السمو السيد أسعد بن طارق آل سعيد، نائب رئيس الوزراء لشؤون العلاقات والتعاون الدولي، والممثل الخاص لجلالة السلطان راعي الحفل، أصحاب السمو والمعالي، المكرمون أعضاء مجلس الدولة وأصحاب السعادة، رئيس وأعضاء مجلس العلوم الدولي، ضيوفنا الأعزاء من مختلف بلدان العالم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نرحب بكم بأجمل عبارات الترحيب في هذا الحدث العلمي البارز، حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط، في إطار الاجتماع الثالث للجمعية العمومية لمجلس العلوم الدولي، الذي يعقد في رحاب سلطنة عمان، حيث يجسد في جوهره أهمية المعارف والعلوم والحوار في تطور حياتنا الإنسانية وفي بناء مستقبل أفضل للأجيال القادمة، لنقف شاهدين على تطورات شهدها العقل البشري، حيث أكد التاريخ أن كل هذا التقدم لم يكن ليتحقق إلا من خلال التبادل المستمر للمعرفة، من خلال العلم الأساس والمرتكز الذي تبنى عليه الابتكارات والتطورات العلمية العالمية. يهدف حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط إلى جذب اهتمام الباحثين والعلماء والمستثمرين وأصحاب القرار من مختلف أنحاء العالم لتبادل الخبرات والرؤى العلمية في ظل التحديات التي تفرضها المتغيرات العلمية العالمية في رحاب العاصمة العمانية مسقط، كما يعكس اهتمام سلطنة عمان بتنظيم الأحداث المحلية والإقليمية والدولية التي تسهم في تطوير المعرفة الإنسانية واهتمامها ورعايتها للعلوم والابتكارات. يقام هذا الحدث العلمي في إطار اجتماع الجمعية العمومية الثالث لمجلس العلوم الدولي، التي تعقد اجتماعها الحضوري لأول مرة منذ تأسيس المجلس عام 2018، بعد عقد الاجتماعين الأول والثاني افتراضيا، وسيتم مناقشة العديد من القضايا الاستراتيجية وتحديد رؤى جديدة للتعاون العلمي على المستوى الدولي، وبحث التحديات الكبرى التي تواجه العالم كتغير المناخ والأمن الغذائي والصحة العالمية والابتكار التكنولوجي والذكاء الاصطناعي وغيرها من المجالات، حيث سيتم تنفيذ 14 جلسة علمية، منها على سبيل المثال إعادة التفكير في التعاون العلمي الدولي في القرن ال21 وتقنيات الناشئة وتطور العلوم وعقد العلوم من أجل الاستدامة، أجندة ما بعد عام 2030، وتعليم العلوم لمستقبلنا، بناء القدرات لمواجهة التحديات العالمية وغيرها من المواضيع العلمية المهمة. صاحب السمو راعي المناسبة، حفلنا الكريم، يسرنا أن نبدأ هذا الحفل بكلمة ترحيبية من البلد المستضيف لهذا الحدث، ممثلا في وزارة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي والابتكار، تقدمها معالي الأستاذة الدكتورة رحمة بنت إبراهيم المحروقية، وزيرة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي والابتكار. فلتتفضل معالي الوزيرة على المنصة مشكورة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. صاحب السمو السيد أسعد بن طارق آل سعيد الموقر، نائب رئيس الوزراء لشؤون العلاقات والتعاون الدولي، والممثل الخاص لجلالة السلطان راعي الحفل، المحترم السيد بيتر جلوكمان رئيس مجلس العلوم الدولي، أصحاب السمو والمعالي المكرمين وأصحاب السعادة، العلماء الأجلاء وأعضاء مجلس العلوم الدولي، ضيوفنا من مختلف دول العالم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ونحن في رحاب هذه اللحظة المباركة، وبكل الامتنان والسعد أتشرف برفع أرق كلمات الشكر وألطف عبارات التقدير إلى صاحب السمو السيد أسعد بن طارق آل سعيد الموقر على تفضله برعاية حفل الافتتاح الرسمي لمنتدى حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط، وهو ضمن فعاليات الاجتماع الثالث للجمعية العمومية لمجلس العلوم العالمي، حيث يعبر عن الأفكار العميقة بكلمات بسيطة وواضحة من قبل علماء وباحثون ومسؤولون من مختلف دول العالم، وهم يلتقون حضورياً في مساحة زاخرة بالعلم والمعرفة من مساحات مدينتنا الجميلة مسقط، وذلك للمرة الأولى منذ يوليو 2018، حينما اندمج المجلس الدولي للعلوم ومجلس العلوم الاجتماعي الدولي تحت مسمى مجلس العلوم الدولي. وعقد الاجتماعان الأول والثاني عبر وسائل الاتصال الافتراضية ليشهد هذا الحدث العلمي المهم في هذا اليوم انطلاقة جديدة في مسيرة التعاون العلمي العالمي. كما نتشرف بالترحيب بضيوفنا الكرام من خارج سلطنة عمان وداخلها، الذين يشاركون معنا اليوم في حفل افتتاح منتدى حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط. فمرحبا بكم إخوة أعزاء وزملاء كرام، نفتح لكم قلوبنا قبل أيدينا بكل ود وترحاب، معبرين عن خالص شكرنا لتلبيتكم الدعوة وتحملكم عناء السفر ومشقته، ونسأل الله أن تكون إقامتكم في سلطنة عمان رائعة ومليئة بالسرور والذكريات الجميلة. صاحب السمو السيد راعي الحفل الموقر، لقد ازدانت بلادنا الغالية سلطنة عمان قبل أيام قليلة بمظاهر البهجة والأناقة العمانية بمختلف مفرداتها بمناسبة الذكرى الخامسة لتولي حضرة صاحب الجلالة السلطان هيثم بن طارق المعظم حفظه الله ورعاه مقاليد الحكم في البلاد. وما شاهدناه في الحفل الطلابي نهضة عمان المتجددة وبرعاية جلالته السامية من اعتناء بالعلوم والبحث العلمي والابتكار بتخصيص لوحة رائعة بعنوان المعرفة، بيّنت أهمية البحث العلمي والابتكار، يثلج الصدر ويلهب الحماسة للمساهمة الجادة في تفعيل دور العلوم في تطوير قدرات أبناء الوطن. وإننا نثمن عالياً توجيه جلالته وتأكيده الدائم على دعم الحكومة لبرامج العلوم والبحث العلمي والابتكار في مختلف القطاعات في عماننا الحبيبة. حضورنا الكرام، إن سلطنة عمان منذ القدم كانت جسراً للمعرفة والتبادل العلمي والثقافي بين مختلف حضارات العالم، فلقد سافر العمانيون إلى أقاصي الأرض ونقلوا علومهم تاركين بصمات خير واضحة في تاريخ البشرية، والذي نشهده اليوم في عمان من تقدم في مجالات التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي والابتكار ما هو إلا امتداد لتلك المسيرة المباركة. حفلنا الكريم، إن التحديات التي يواجهها العالم اليوم كثيرة ومتنوعة، وللأسف فإن بعضاً منها كان نتاجاً لاكتشافات علمية كان ينبغي أن تستخدم لخدمة المجتمعات الإنسانية، غير أنها وجدت المناخ المناسب ليتم استغلالها لغير صالح البشر. ومن هنا يتحتم علينا نحن القائمون على العلوم أن نتعامل مع المعرفة والمكتشفات العلمية بمبادئ أخلاقية راسخة وواضحة، واضعين نصب أعيننا سلامة مجتمعاتنا البشرية واستدامتها، وسلامة كوكبنا بتنوع بيئاته وما خلقه الله فيه من مخلوقات ومفردات. إن المقصد النبيل من العلم والعلوم هو أن تساهم في رفاه بني البشر، وأن تقلل من معاناة الأقل حظاً منهم، وأن تحقق قدراً من العدالة الاجتماعية في المجتمعات الإنسانية أينما كان موقعها في أحضان أمنا الأرض. وهذا لا يمكن تحقيقه إلا إذا تكاملت العلوم البحتة والعلوم الطبيعية مع العلوم الإنسانية والاجتماعية، بحيث يسعى العلم متحداً لفهم طبيعة الإنسان وطبائعه والظواهر الاجتماعية التي تنشأ من علاقات الناس بعضهم ببعض، ومن تأثرهم بما ينتجه العلم من معرفة وتقنيات قد تؤثر في ديناميكيات التفاعل بين الأفراد والمجتمعات. إن التحديات التي برزت منذ عقود من استغلال جائر لموارد الطبيعة ومن سباق محموم لتوفير الرفاه بتطوير الآلة والتقنيات الحديثة، دون أن نأخذ في الحسبان مدى التأثر الذي سيخلقه هذا التطوير على مستقبلنا الإنساني، تتطلب منا التوقف قليلاً وإعادة النظر فيما نحدثه من أثر، كما علينا التخطيط بشكل دقيق ومحسوب مع تضافر الجهود الدولية في مجالات البحث العلمي والتطوير، لنصنع للأجيال القادمة مستقبلاً أكثر أماناً وعدلاً وطمأنينة، حيث يختفي القلق والاكتئاب والعزلة التي أصبحت من سمات هذا العصر، وهي تزداد انتشاراً يوماً بعد يوم. وتقع على عاتقنا نحن المعنيون بالعلوم مسؤولية كبيرة للعمل المتواصل من أجل البشرية، وذلك بتزويد الأجيال الجديدة بالمعرفة التي تنمي الإدراك والوعي بالمسؤولية الفردية والمجتمعية تجاه العالم أجمع. وهذا الوعي لن يتأتى إلا بتضمين المعرفة الرصينة التي ينتجها العلماء البارزون في المناهج المدرسية والبرامج العلمية والأكاديمية بمؤسسات التعليم العالي وفي الأنشطة الصفية واللا صفية، وأن يتم مشاركة هذه المعرفة وإتاحتها لأكبر عدد ممكن من الناس من خلال شبكات المعرفة والملتقيات العلمية كملتقانا هذا، الذي يمثل منصة حيوية لبناء شراكات دولية علمية داعمة للإنسانية، وتسهم في تحقيق تقدم ملموس في مجالات التنمية المستدامة التي تهم البشر جميعاً. أيها الجمع البهي، إننا نؤمن في سلطنة عمان أن التعليم والبحث العلمي والابتكار هي حجر الزاوية للتقدم في جميع المجالات، ولذلك وضعت رؤية عمان 2040 هدفاً استراتيجياً طموحاً، وهو أن تكون سلطنة عمان في مصاف الدول المتقدمة. ولقد أكدنا من خلال الاستراتيجيات الوطنية على أهمية دعم العلماء والمبتكرين وتوفير بيئة علمية مناسبة تؤهلهم لتحقيق الإنجازات التي تعود بالنفع على المجتمع. وفي إطار الاستراتيجيات الوطنية، فإن استراتيجية البحث العلمي والتطوير 2040 تهدف إلى إرساء قواعد قوية للبحث العلمي في عمان، وكذلك فإن استراتيجية الابتكار 2040 تسعى لتحفيز الابتكار والتطور التكنولوجي على جميع الأصعدة دعماً للتنمية البشرية. كما أن استراتيجية التعليم 2040 تضع الطالب في قلب العملية التعليمية وتضمن له بيئة علمية رائدة تحقق التميز له في كافة مجالات المعرفة. وتقوم خطط تنفيذ هذه الاستراتيجيات على التكامل بين إنتاج المعرفة وتوظيفها من جهة وتعزيز البيئات التمكينية لها من جهة أخرى. حضورنا الكريم، إن دعم البحث العلمي والابتكار هو من أبرز أولوياتنا في وزارة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي والابتكار، حيث يتم تمويل العديد من الأبحاث العلمية سنوياً من خلال الوزارة من خلال الموازنات التي توفرها الوزارة. وقد دشنت الوزارة برامج عديدة لدعم وتطوير البنى البحثية وبناء الكفاءات وخلق الشراكات الوطيدة بين الشركاء والفاعلين في مجالات البحث العلمي والتطوير والابتكار لتحقيق التكامل وتعظيم الأثر من الجهود الوطنية المبذولة من قبل القطاع الحكومي والقطاع الخاص والمؤسسات الأكاديمية والبحثية. كما تم إنشاء كراسي السلطان قابوس العلمية في جامعات مرموقة حول العالم إسهاماً من سلطنة عمان في إنتاج المعرفة وزيادة التعارف والتآلف بين الثقافات على الصعيد العالمي. وبالمثل يساهم البرنامج العماني للتعاون الثقافي والعلمي في خلق جسر إنساني بين الشعوب بتوفير بعثات ومنح دراسية للطلبة في كثير من دول العالم، مما يساعد في تحقيق هدف التعليم للجميع ويقلل الفقر بخلق بارقة أمل للمتعلمين في إمكانية أن ينعموا بمستقبل وحياة أفضل. واستلهاماً من برنامج المؤتلف الإنساني الذي أطلقه جلالة السلطان الراحل طيب الله ثراه، وتحقيقاً للتوجيهات السامية لمولانا حضرة صاحب الجلالة السلطان هيثم بن طارق المعظم، فقد أطلقت الوزارة برنامج توأمة مؤسسات التعليم العالي العمانية مع نظيراتها في الدول المختلفة حول العالم لتشجيع التعاون بينها في كافة المجالات، كما عملت على تشجيع استقطاب الطلبة الدوليين وخاصة لتعلم اللغة العربية، ووفرت منحاً دراسية وتدريبية لعدد منهم. وفي سياق متصل ولأجل تعزيز دور عمان كمركز رائد في مجال البحث العلمي، فقد أنشئت مراكز بحثية في مجالات علمية متنوعة مثل الصحة والمياه والطاقة والبيئة. ومن أبرز هذه المراكز مركز عمان للموارد الوراثية الحيوانية والنباتية، والذي يعد من أبرز المراكز العلمية في المنطقة ويرتبط بعلاقات بحثية قوية مع الجامعات العمانية والعالمية. وقد حقق العديد من الإنجازات العلمية النوعية التي تسهم في فهم التنوع البيولوجي في بلادنا والحفاظ عليه. ومن أبرز هذه الإنجازات الاكتشافات النوعية في مجال الفطريات، فمثلاً تم مؤخراً اكتشاف 3 أنواع من الفطريات الكبيرة التي تعرف لأول مرة في العالم، فضلاً عن اكتشاف 10 فطريات أخرى تسجل لأول مرة في عمان والجزيرة العربية، والتي تم جمعها من مناطق مختلفة في محافظة ظفار في خريف 2023. وهذه الاكتشافات تمثل إضافة علمية مهمة تؤكد دور سلطنة عمان كمركز علمي رائد في هذا المجال. حفلنا البهيج. إن منتدى حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط يعد فرصة بارزة تجمع أكثر من 500 مشارك يشكلون نخبة من المفكرين والعلماء والباحثين وصناع السياسات والشركاء من مختلف دول العالم لمناقشة التحديات العالمية واستشراف أولويات التعاون الدولي في المجالات العلمية. كما يعتبر هذا المنتدى فرصة مواتية لصياغة التآلف والتفاهم العالمي وبناء الشراكات الدولية في مجالات العلوم والبحث العلمي والتطوير. ويتضمن منتدى حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط الذي يقام خلال الفترة من 27 إلى 28 يناير جلسات حوارية متعددة التخصصات حول 3 موضوعات رئيسية هي مستقبل العلوم ودبلوماسية العلوم والثقة في العلوم وقضايا المساواة والتماسك الاجتماعي. كما تستضيف سلطنة عمان ممثلة بوزارة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي والابتكار اجتماع الجمعية العمومية الثالث لمجلس العلوم الدولي، وذلك خلال الفترة من 29 إلى 30 يناير 2025، حيث تعقد الجمعية العمومية كل 4 سنوات، وتعد المنصة العليا التي تجمع أعضاء المجلس وشركائه لمناقشة القضايا الاستراتيجية وتحديد رؤى جديدة للتعاون العلمي على المستوى الدولي. صاحب السمو السيد أسعد بن طارق الموقر راعي الحفل، إننا اليوم وبرعايتكم الكريمة لهذا الحفل العلمي نبعث رسالة عمانية من عاصمتها العريقة مسقط إلى جميع الأصدقاء في مختلف دول العالم، مفادها أن العلم يجب أن يكون في صلب أولوياتنا، وأن تعزيز قدرات العلماء والباحثين وتمكينهم لتوظيف العلوم والمعرفة لخدمة البشرية هو السبيل إلى بناء مستقبل أفضل للجميع. وختاماً أتوجه بالشكر الجزيل المقرون بعابق التقدير وعاطر التحية إليكم صاحب السمو السيد أسعد بن طارق آل سعيد الموقر على تكرمكم برعاية حفلنا هذا، شاكرين لسموكم اهتمامكم وعنايتكم بالبحث العلمي والتطوير والابتكار، وهو تأصيل لعنايتكم الشخصية بالعلم والمعرفة برئاستكم مجلس أمناء جامعة نزوة، فالشكر الجزيل لكم. كما أتقدم بالشكر للسيد بيتر غلوكمان رئيس مجلس العلوم الدولي وجميع أعضاء المجلس على حضورهم ودعمهم منذ اليوم الأول لاستضافة سلطنة عمان لاجتماعات الجمعية العمومية وحوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط. كما أشكر جميع المشاركين في المنتدى وأعضاء اللجان المنظمة على جهودهم الواضحة في إعداد هذا الحدث العلمي البارز، راجين لكم جميعاً طيب الإقامة في مدينتنا الهادئة مسقط والاستفادة المثرية من الجلسات العلمية خلال يومي المنتدى. كما أرجو التوفيق لاجتماعات الجمعية العمومية لمجلس العلوم الدولي. هذا وبالله التوفيق، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
صاحب السمو راعي الحفل، حفلنا الكريم، يعد هذا المنتدى منصة حوارية هامة لرفع التعاون الدولي وتعزيز تبادل المعرفة. وفي هذه المناسبة البارزة التي تنظمها وزارة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي والابتكار بالتعاون مع مجلس العلوم الدولي، يسرني أن أدعو السير بيتر غلوكمان رئيس مجلس العلوم الدولي الذي سيلقي كلمة ترحيبية يشاركنا فيها رؤيته حول الدور الحيوي للتعاون الدولي في مجالات العلوم والمعرفة، وكيف يمكن للمنتديات مثل منتدى حوار المعرفة أن تسهم في تعزيز هذا التعاون وتوجيهه نحو حلول فعالة للتحديات العالمية. عليه ندعو السير بيتر للصعود على المنصة لتقديم الكلمة.
Dear distinguished guests and colleagues, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Muscat Global Knowledge Dialogue. Salam Aleichem. First, on behalf of the scientific community, let me extend our heartfelt gratitude to His Majesty Sultan Haitham bin Tariq Al Said for generously supporting the hosting of the Muscat Global Knowledge Dialogue and then the General Assembly of the International Science Council. We extend our profound thanks to His Highness Sayyid Asad bin Tariq Al Said, Deputy Prime Minister for International Relations and Cooperation Affairs, and the special representative of His Majesty the Sultan for patronising the opening ceremony and indeed the whole meeting. And I particularly want to acknowledge Her Excellency Professor Rahma bin Ibrahim Al Matruki, Minister of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, not only for her warm words and enthusiastic support of this meeting, but for her wisdom and her friendship as we're developing the partnership between the Sultanate of Oman and the International Science Council. 6.5 years ago, at the inaugural General Assembly of the International Science Council, Oman offered to host the next General Assembly, which was scheduled for 2021. Unfortunately, COVID intervened, and the consequent disruption meant delays as to when the ISC could convene. Indeed, our constitution required us to have an electronic second General Assembly in October 21. But the Omani government and its officials remained highly committed to hosting the General Assembly, and hence we're here this week. I, the ISC Board and Secretariat, are particularly grateful for the ongoing commitment of the Sultanate of Oman and the friendship of many, many officials to demonstrating the importance of science as a global public good. During these delays, of course, the ISC continued to progress, and the board identified that we should develop a new kind of dialogue to that which had dominated most international and regional science meetings. Namely, we should attempt to bridge the gap between science and policy, but do so in a way which was regionally relevant, and hence came the concept of regional components of a knowledge dialogue series. We started in Pretoria, Cape Town, then in Kuala Lumpur, and then in Santiago, and now we bring much of that experience together here in the Muscat Global Dialogue. Later in this week, we will follow that with our third formal General Assembly. It's worth reflecting for a moment on the ISC, because it's a new organisation built on a very old legacy. In 2018, it merged its natural and social science predecessors into a new organisation with a new vision, mission, and orientation. The ISC is now unequivocally the central organisation bringing the global voice of science to the multilateral system and in its many components, promoting the use of evidence, making at all levels, taking an important role, a growing role in science diplomacy, working at a high level on the issues requiring global scientific cooperation, and in particular promoting transdisciplinary approaches about which we will talk more this week, continuing as a strong advocate for the freedom and responsibility of science, and very much focused on how science and science systems will evolve in a world where artificial intelligence will change who are the actors and the modes of the reporting and production of knowledge, including the very rapid rise of the role of the private sector, even in basic science. But there has been during this period a very welcome but overdue shift in the centre of gravity of science to a more global and diverse input of geography and gender. But at the same time, science is the only universal knowledge system is challenged by growing relativism, disinformation, and geostrategic issues, some of which threaten the very real progress we've been making in opening science and the scientific record to the world. And sadly, there's a sense that there's a declining trust in institutions, including the institution of science itself. That is our challenge. The International Science Council is proud that it's inclusive of countries and disciplines, is strictly non-political in a geostrategic sense, and is increasingly, in its spread of member organisations, truly comprehensive. It's increasingly obvious that if science is to play its core role in protecting the global commons and promoting regional and national development, it must speak with a much stronger and a much more unified voice. And during this week, we'll be discussing how to achieve that. But today and tomorrow, we'll focus in this dialogue on some of the more obvious issues at the interface between science and society, science and policy, science providing and supporting the global good. Where possible, we will put it in the context of the critical role of science in social, environmental and economic development in every country, including emerging countries, and indeed in advanced countries as well. Oman is a remarkable example. Oman is an example of a fast emerging, ambitious country that has recognised how science and education and higher education are absolutely essential to national development. And they'll be applauded for their realistic vision, their delivery on that vision, and the future that they hold for this country. Their commitment to this forum is an evidence of that ambition and hope, and the fact that science really can make a difference in a world that needs to be better. They've also been a leader in science diplomacy, and I've worked very closely over the last few years with many members of the Omani society. Later this morning, we'll sign a memorandum of understanding with the Sultanate of Oman, which actually reflects that commitment as we build our regional focal point, our regional office for this part of the world in Oman, as a demonstration of this ongoing commitment between the International Science Council and the Sultanate to work closely together. But let us also be honest. Let's remember the history of humankind is about using knowledge and technology both for good and bad. Some of the challenges we now face directly emerge from what was progress in science and technology in the past. Climate change is in the end a consequence of progress in industrial technology more than 150 years ago. War has always and remains based on science and technological advances. And we've seen the complex political and social reactions to the success of COVID vaccines. And now we have a rush to embrace artificial intelligence without fully understanding all its implications for humankind and societies. Such issues are realpolitik and mean we must embrace the need for natural and social scientists, policymakers, politicians, diplomats, and indeed all citizens to understand that science has both obligations and a critical role to play in addressing every challenge that societies face at every scale. The International Science Council has championed transdisciplinary approaches which have become much more important. In the end, science must be at the policy table. As I've said, the science community has important responsibilities and opportunities. We have a universal language. Our goal is to better understand the world around us and within us and see that knowledge applied for the global public good. Science is an essential part of the route to environmental well-being, social and economic development. As a broadly and uniquely representative organisation, the International Science Council has a critical role to play, but it will be much more effective as we become more comprehensive and more unified. Let me finish by once more extending our profound appreciation to His Majesty Sultan Haitham bin Tariq Al Said for supporting this conference and science in this region, to His Highness Syed Haitham bin Tariq Al Said for his patronage of the meeting, and to Her Excellency Professor Rahma bin Ibrahim Al Maruki for all she's done to ensure that this meeting will be a success and to ensure that the ISC continues in a growing partnership with the Sultanate of Oman. I thank everybody for coming, and I look forward to what should be an engaging meeting. Thank you once more, everybody in Oman and the people of Oman, for your remarkable hospitality. Thank you.
منذ الأزل كان العلم هو النور الذي يسمو بالبشرية نحو الازدهار، لغة عالمية تتجاوز حدود المكان والزمان، تسافر بين الحضارات، تلهم العقول وتكتب فصولا جديدة في تاريخ الإنسانية مع كل اكتشاف. العلم ليس مجرد معادلات جامدة أو أبحاث مختبرية، إنه حياة نابضة في تفاصيل يومنا المتسارع، يمنحنا أدوات لفهم عالم يتغير في كل لحظة، يحسن جودة حياتنا ويخلق ابتكارات تعيد تشكيل المستقبل. إنه وعد بالتجديد ورسالة تسعى لصياغة حياة أفضل للجميع. قوة العلم تكمن في التعاون، في العمل المشترك الذي يتخطى حدود الجغرافيا واللغة والثقافة. من خلال تلاقي العقول وتبادل الأفكار نواجه التحديات الكبرى ونبني حلولاً مستدامة تحقق مستقبلاً أفضل. وفي عالم مليء بالتحديات يرتفع صوت العلم ليكون بوصلة ترسم مسارات المستقبل المشترك ودعامة تعزز الحوار والثقة والتواصل. عندما نتحد نبدع حلولاً أكثر استدامة ونصنع معاً غداً أكثر إشراقاً. العلم هو إرثنا المشترك، وهو وعد دائم بالإبداع والاكتشاف وفتح آفاق جديدة تحقق طموحات الإنسانية. من سلطنة عمان، أرض العلوم والحضارات العريقة، يأتي حوار المعرفة العالمي مسقط ليجسد إسهام هذا البلد في تعزيز قوة العلم كإطار للتعاون العالمي. هذه المبادرة المشتركة مع المجلس الدولي للعلوم تنسجم ورؤية عمان التي تضع الإنسان في صميم التنمية المستدامة، وتؤكد دورها كشريك دولي مؤثر في صياغة مستقبل المعرفة والابتكار.
Hello everyone, salam alaikum. I'm Melissa Hoganboom, a science correspondent at the BBC and an author. It's an honor to be here today, and I've covered science for well over a decade, and every time I do so, I still get that feeling of awe and wonder when I come across a new groundbreaking discovery. And these findings, of course, don't happen without truly global collaborations. We all know that the real-world impacts of what you all do are vast. But to give but one example, I've recently covered research looking at how the most marginalized groups in society, the resulting stress can change their brain and can increase many mental health concerns. But what I find so inspiring is that these types of inequalities can be changed when we better understand the contributing factors, and that's the first step towards bridging them. And to do so, all the topics being discussed at this conference are, of course, vital. Of course, there are also challenges that need to be addressed when science is done in silos, contradictory findings reduce the trust in the public. But what's so vital for the future of credible interdisciplinary research, especially in an increasingly polarized world, is working together. When my daughter, who's only 7, recently asked me if I liked my job, I said, I love it. She asked me why. And I said, imagine learning something new and interesting every day and being able to share it with the world in a way that can change people's lives. But of course, the only reason I can do so is because what many of you tell me and what I can report is only based on credible research. So before we hear from the keynote speakers, I'd first like to read a message from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations General Secretary. Uniting through science is key to tackling our common challenges, from addressing the climate crisis to combating global pandemics, to taking on the untold risk posed by emerging technologies. The International Science Council is an indispensable bridge between science and policy, connecting the researchers to the work of global decision makers. Your crucial role is the reason I invite the Council to contribute to the work of the United Nations through the Scientific Advisory Board. By uniting experts across disciplines, the board connects UN leaders to global networks representing thousands of scientists and academics, especially in developing countries. And it helps to ensure that science shapes policy solutions for people and planet. This spirit is central to the Pact for the Future, adopted at the United Nations by member states last September. The Pact recognizes the crucial role of science and technology cooperation to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and supercharging progress around the world. We need your insights and expertise in this important task. Together, let's harness the power of science to build a more peaceful, sustainable, and healthy future for all. And I'd now like to invite our keynote speakers one at a time. The keynote speakers are Professor Ruth Morgan, Director of the University College London Centre for the Forensic Sciences, and His Excellency Csaba Kőrösi, President of the 77th United Nations General Assembly. Ruth, if you can come up first, please.
Your Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As we've been hearing, it's becoming increasingly clear that we live in an increasingly fractured world. It is a fractured world where tensions and conflicts are evident globally and locally. We're seeing polarization and isolation in our societies. We are seeing trust being eroded. And yet we are here today. We are here because we share a vision. We share a vision that science can contribute to addressing these complex challenges. And so as we embark on this exciting meeting, I would like to plant a seed. I would like to suggest that for science to achieve what we all know is possible in, for, and with society, we need to consider our science systems, and we need to consider whether we need a renewed social contract for science. A renewed social contract for science that enables us to ask big questions and ask different questions so that science can make the breakthroughs that are needed to find the solutions to the challenges that our society faces today and in the future. Let me share with you a little of the journey that has got me to this point. I have found a home as an interdisciplinary scientist. I started in geography, moved to environmental science, applied environmental science to forensic science, and am now in the engineering faculty. 3 years ago, I set up an institute at our university with a wonderful colleague, Professor Maurice Biriotti. He is a classicist, a literary scholar, a business architect, a policy advisor, and he's in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. Together, we've built a multidisciplinary research team. It sits at the intersections of all the disciplines, and it sits at the intersections between the university, government, business, and industry. And we're experimenting. We're experimenting with developing transdisciplinary approaches to some of the most tricky, knotty, complex challenges that we're seeing in society, whether that's generative AI, inequality, or conflict. And what has emerged from our research is that there are many complex challenges where we are making real progress. But at the same time, there are a number of challenges that are really persistent, and we're not making the progress that we'd like to at the pace and scale that we need to. And those persistent challenges are actually very distinctive. What we're seeing in our research is that to tackle these persistent challenges, it is often not a case of needing to generate more knowledge. It's more that there's a need to ask different questions of the existing wealth of deep knowledge that exists within our learned societies, within our disciplines, within our universities. And it's about finding ways to bring that existing knowledge together in new ways. At the same time as all of that, it becomes really clear that this kind of transdisciplinary research that seeks to engage meaningfully with society is incredibly difficult to do. It doesn't fit neatly or easily into our existing categories, into our institutional infrastructures or our existing funding infrastructures. And it's very hard to build bridges in an increasingly fractured and polarized landscape that is constantly changing. And as we've been wrestling with this, as many of us today here are, what's emerged is that a really important part of this story to date is the social contract for science, and how that social contract has evolved and changed over the last 80 years. The social contract was originally articulated by Bush and Stillman in the 1940s as the world emerged from World War II. It encapsulated a framework of a broadly transactional relationship between science and society, where scientists took responsibility for high-quality research, and society committed to providing funding and autonomy to researchers to do that research, with the belief that the outputs of that research would create benefits for society. It's really striking that both Bush and Stillman clearly stated that within that framework, researchers needed to have the freedom to work on the so-called basic research, where the applications of that work were not evident in the short term. And it's possible to argue that this created an incredibly fertile ground for scientists to explore, to experiment, to take risks, to innovate, and make discoveries. Over time, throughout the mid to late 20th century, the impact of science applications gained incredible visibility. There were many significant positive outcomes, the science that got humans to the moon. But at the same time, some more problematic outcomes also came to light, like the impact of pesticides on the environment or the safety of nuclear energy. And it's in this time that it became clear that not all science progress brought developments that were universally agreed upon to be positive. And with this came a shift in the social contract for science. It became increasingly expected that publicly funded research needed to have outputs that were clearly relevant to society. And what emerged was a move towards ensuring that publicly funded science, like other publicly funded services, was accountable and could demonstrate value for money. And increasingly, in the last 25 years, we can see that demonstrating clear and measurable impact has become incredibly important. And that has arguably led to a lot of the excellent science taking place focusing on more immediate term challenges and often in ways that reduce the risk of that research. So what we're seeing is that the social contract for science in its current form is no longer characterized by the level of trust, autonomy, and freedom that was evident in its earlier incarnations. Instead, science is increasingly finding itself in a more customer-contractor relationship, which means that outputs are increasingly being decided at the outset of the research. In some situations, it's reducing the space for basic research, and we're in a context where science is often valued on the basis of its level of or potential for commercialization. So it's possible to argue that we are now in a time where we have never been more connected. We have never had so much accessible knowledge and insight. And yet at the same time, we are in a time where trust is being eroded to the point that doing science in the context of a social contract arguably that restricts the full capacity and capabilities of science. And trust lies at the heart of this. The social contract for science has changed as trust has been eroded. So where does that leave us? There are no easy answers, of course not. It's incredibly complex, it's nuanced, it's always context dependent, and there's never one size that's going to fit all. But at the beginning of this global knowledge dialogue, I would like to, if I may, present two more seeds. The first is dialogue. Relationships are about trust. Relationships are built and survive on dialogue. Dialogues within our communities, dialogues that cross traditional boundaries of discipline, sector, generation, and culture, as we've been hearing this morning. And we're going to need those dialogues to bring the usual suspects together with the unusual suspects. And I can see some nods. This isn't a controversial point. But how we actually do it isn't trivial. To have these kinds of meaningful, diverse dialogues at the scale that is needed, we need more opportunities like the one we have here. And we need to find ways for that dialogue to be ongoing, to be open-ended. And in our dialogue, we need to ask some big questions. Big questions around our funding structures. How do we create opportunities to think beyond established categories and disciplines? How do we create opportunities to ask difficult questions, to take more risk, and to be able to listen to the difficult answers that might emerge? We also need to ask big questions around our recognition and reward structures, because dialogue takes time. It takes time to become good at it. It takes time to build relationships to the point where it's possible to have those meaningful, boundary-crossing, open-ended, cooperative, and really critically, informal dialogues. And we need to be ensuring that the leaders of tomorrow are able to build those relationships at the start of their career so that they can bear fruit. And then the second seed is about asking different questions. There was a fascinating study by Park et al. That came out in Nature 2 years ago. They looked at 45 million papers and 3.9 million patents from the last 60 years. And they found that in every field, papers and patents were increasingly less likely to break with the past in ways that push science and technology in new directions. They linked this decline in what they termed disruptiveness to a narrowing of the use of previous knowledge. And again, it is easy to say we need to ask different questions, but it is challenging to make it a reality. We need to pause, just for a moment, and learn the lessons of the past where we had great revolutions in our thinking and understanding. When those breakthroughs happened, whether it was from a team or an individual, they broadly came about by the researchers bringing together a very varied set of inputs that span the sciences, social sciences, arts, and humanities. As we look forward, we need to make sure that we're creating opportunities for diversity of thought, Diversity that comes from different disciplinary backgrounds, for sure, but also from different philosophies, different methodologies. And we know that this isn't easy, but we are only going to make progress and make breakthroughs if we're prepared to be more omnivorous in the knowledge and insight that we bring to challenges, to embrace the tensions as well as the synergies, and to become comfortable with being uncomfortable as we sit in those grey zones. So let us make the most of this incredible opportunity for dialogue that lies ahead. Let us consider a renewed social contract for science, a renewed social contract that enables us to rebuild and regain trust in science and society, and that sets us on a path for thinking beyond our established categories, for taking risks and asking difficult questions, for seeking out diverse thinking on the challenges we face, knowing that it will be uncomfortable, and ensuring that science makes the breakthroughs that will lead to the transformation and innovation that we know that society needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. That was very inspiring, and trust and dialogue are themes I'm sure we'll keep coming back to. I'd now like to welcome His Excellency Csaba Kőrösi, President of the 77th United Nations General Assembly. Please come to the stage.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Your Highness, Madam Minister, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for offering me this opportunity to address you this morning, and many, many thanks for your hospitality. We have heard some of the major challenges humanity is facing and the academic community is facing. But let me invite you to look at what is behind some of these challenges. What are the facts and what are the processes that are driving those mounting challenges? First and foremost, let's see what is the nature of the crisis we are facing in the world. It has a dual nature. On one hand, we are witnessing a rising geopolitical rivalry in the world, and on the other hand, we see a multifaceted polycrisis stemming from non-sustainable way of operations. You may say that it is not new. We always had geopolitical competition, and in the last 30, 40 years, we were always facing some features, crises stemming from non-sustainable way of operations. But what is new, they started reinforcing each other, creating a new reality. The rising geopolitical conflicts are built usually on a zero-sum game logic, while crises affecting global common goods can only be addressed only through global cooperation. But unfortunately, the latter is increasingly influenced by the zero-sum game approach taken over from the geopolitical struggle. If that is happening, the result is not another zero-sum game, but a declining global commons. Another fact, what we have to take into consideration, as it was alluded already this morning, it's an age of wars. We are witnessing 56 armed conflicts raging in the world as we speak. It is the largest number since the end of the Second World War, science and technology are usually make leapfrogging during the time of big wars, but mostly on how to subdue the enemy. Scientific discoveries and leapfrogging sustainability technologies must have a different role as well. Today, we are losing much more people to pollution and climate change than to armed conflicts. If we do the science right and technology development right, we can save more people than what we lose to armed conflicts. Another major issue we have to pay attention to is the way too slow transformation to sustainable development. Sustainability to transformation is a repeatedly taken political commitment, but the implementation is going way too slow, much slower than the rise of interlinked challenges. I'm sharing this chart with you not because I like it. It is just indicating that 60% through the time allocated for the implementation of the SDGs, about 17% of the targets have been met. But why don't I really like this chart? Because it gives you an impression that we are dealing with 17 separate stories, 17 siloed processes. When we created the SDGs, it has never been meant to be separated. It has been meant to be an integrated system. But let me ask you, can we answer the question properly and precisely? Where are we now with the sustainability transformation? Do we have a reliable system of measuring sustainability transformation? The honest answer, we don't have it yet. Can we turn and integrate data from very different dimensions of sustainability transformation, turn them into information, then into knowledge in order to assist decision shaping? But without an integrated methodology of managing transformation, our investments will have much less impact than what we are expecting. In other words, we are losing a lot of money. Another feature we have to pay attention is the declining relevance of our global institutions. The changes agreed upon can only be achieved through cooperation based on scientific and technological breakthrough. But our multilateral decision-making platforms have no solid system of involving scientific knowledge. It is happening mostly on ad hoc basis, but not solid system into the decision shaping, the verification of the relevance of the decision taken, and the verification of the implementation. We have global visions. We have adopted them jointly, 193 countries. But who is to implement them? It is still not entirely clear for everybody. SDGs, Pact for the Future, referred to by the Secretary General of the United Nations, are all global visions, shared principles, desires. But global visions must always be translated into national, regional plans and projects. Even the Pact for the Future, as mentioned by the Secretary General of the UN, is talking about so-called actions. Half of the 56 so-called actions of the Pact for the Future require national implementation, and the other half is to be achieved through multilateral cooperation. Since these actions are hardly more than desires, principles, goals, their implementation require clarification of roles, agreements, implementation processes, and scientific projects. The ambiguity on roles would slow down lining up scientific support for sustainability transformation. Science is outlined as a key tool of achieving the Pact for the Future. But have we identified what should be the scientific projects? Because declaring the objectives is not enough. Who is doing what? Who is going to organize the scientific support? Do we have the efficient institutional architecture for that? And some ideas I would like to share with you. The institutional setup. We all know that United Nations, as well as our big international global platforms and organizations, do need reform in order to become relevant for the 21st century and the agreed global transformation. The UN negotiation processes should always be built on scientific evidence as a point of departure. Otherwise, instead of desired transformation, we get into increasing frustration and distrust among nations. Scientific input should be part of the standard procedure and should be based on institutional arrangements. How to do it? There might be many ways, but let me offer you one of the possible ways. The UN General Assembly today looks like a single-chamber parliament. We keep talking about the necessity of including into the decision shaping the academia, business, industry, youth, indigenous peoples and others. But how? We have an empty shell organization within the UN. It is the Trusteeship Council, which has already lost its mission. It's there, but ideal. Why don't we turn it into a second or more chambers, bringing aboard academia, business, youth, and others to participate in decision shaping while preserving the ultimate political responsibility of the General Assembly as it is today. We need to identify scientific projects for the Pact for the Future, so-called actions. Selecting priorities, identifying the actors, possibly platforms of cooperation. And my question to you and to the General Assembly, who can be the best organizers to organize the academic community to make this contribution? Is it International Science Council? Is it TWAS, UNESCO, or a consortium of all? What could be the key scientific project to assist implementation? And a rather personal advice to all of us. Consider the decision-making context. Learn the language of the decision makers, because the scientific input itself is relevant if it addresses the very problems decision makers are facing or will be facing. The outcome of scientific research should be better expressed in the language of the political and economic decision makers. They have less chances to master the language and skills of scientists. We need to develop and agree on an integrated methodology of measuring sustainability transformation. It is a task we inherited from the SDGs. The target 19 in SDG 17 has already identified that we have to go beyond GDP and we have to create the measurement system. The Action 56 of the Pact for the Future is repeating this task, but it still remains a debt by the academic community. Most components are at hand, and some inspiring suggestions are on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget, we can master what we measure, and we can implement what we can master. Thank you very much for your attention.
إننا إذ ننظر إلى المؤسسات التعليمية والمراكز البحثية والمعرفية بجميع مستوياتها على أنها أساس بنائنا العلمي والمعرفي ومستند تقدمنا التقني والصناعي، لنؤكد على استمرار نهجنا الداعي إلى تمكين هذا القطاع وربط مناهج التعليم بمتطلبات النمو الاقتصادي وتعزيز الفرص لأبنائنا وبناتنا، متسلحين بمناهج التفكير العلمي والانفتاح على الآفاق الرحبة للعلوم والمعارف، وموجهين طاقاتهم المعرفية والذهنية إلى الإبداع والابتكار والتطوير، ليصبحوا أسساً للاستثمار الحقيقي وقادة للتطوير الاقتصادي.
وهذا هو النهج الذي انتهجته سلطنة عمان في دعم الابتكار والعلوم، بما يتماشى ورؤية عمان 2040 التي تركز على التحول إلى اقتصاد مستدام قائم على المعرفة، وذلك من خلال إنشاء مؤسسات علمية ومراكز بحثية وإقرار رؤى واستراتيجيات ومبادرات وطنية تهدف إلى تعزيز البحث العلمي والإسهام في الاقتصاد المعرفي، وتوقيع اتفاقيات وبرامج تعاون وشراكات علمية مع مؤسسات أكاديمية إقليمية وعالمية لتحقيق التعاون البناء ودعم الباحثين والمبتكرين والمبدعين العمانيين في مختلف المجالات. وكل هذه الخطوات هي تعزيز لإيماننا الراسخ في دور العلم كأداة رئيسة لرفاهية الإنسان وحماية الكوكب. ونحن هنا اليوم نجتمع ونتشارك ونتحاور استجابة لركيزة وطنية رئيسة في التنمية المستدامة لهذا البلد العزيز، وتناغماً مع الأهداف الأممية للتنمية المستدامة 2030.
Hello. Check. Yes. It's now time for our panel discussion. So I'd like to welcome to the stage His Excellency Abdussalam Al-Mashidi, President of Oman Investment Authority and the ISC Global Commissioner. His Excellency Dr. Munir El-Dasuki, President of King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology. Professor Francois Baylis, Distinguished and Research Professor Emerita, Dalhousie University and President-elect of the Royal Society of Canada, and Professor Salim Abdul Karim, Director CAPRISA and Vice President for Membership of the International Science Council. Please come to the stage. In the interests of time, I'm going to be very strict with timekeeping because we have to cut this panel a little bit short. But I'd like to start with you, Your Excellency Abdul Salam. What do you think are the most urgent areas where investment in science is needed to ensure a sustainable future?
The most urgent topics to invest in, that's the question? Okay, yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. This particular topic, the most urgent happen to be probably the most important areas for investments. And I would start by education. Not only educating the right scientists and engineers to mitigate the natural challenges, but also to educate the general public on how to make the best human behaviors in order to make our planet more inhabitable. But in addition to that, if we go to the tangible investment areas in terms of mitigating the climate changes, for example, renewable energy probably comes top of that list. Right now, globally, we invest around $1.8 trillion in renewable energy. That's very serious investments. But in order to reach net zero, we have to invest nearly $4 trillion every year, annually, by the year 2030. This is much more serious commitment globally. Of course, in addition to that, we have to invest in infrastructure globally, actually, to make the physical infrastructure more resilient to natural disaster, but also digital infrastructure to communicate and educate people and make sure that everybody has the right to have access to affordable education, medicine, and food. Today, we have around 2.6 billion population who are offline still. Investing in agricultural technologies, we have to go more into vertical plantation and other technologies to control insects and mitigate the weather changes. And by the year 2050, we're going to have around 9.6 billion population that need to be fed, and logistically as well, you need to provide in time the right food for them. Of course, medical, needless to say, we need to invest more into the healthcare system. Sometimes it's not the virus that kills you, but the lack of proper medical care at the right time. All of these are huge business opportunities. I mean, the vaccination industry by itself was around $35 billion industry in 2019, but post-COVID, it now became 50 billion industry. The list goes on, and where do we invest in? We need to prioritize. Probably the priority list will differ from one geography to the other.
Of course, thank you so much. So change is clearly needed in a lot of areas. So Francois, over to you. Do you see any changes in the role of science in society, given what we've heard so far?
I think one of the things we really need to pay attention to is the shifting role of the scientist. And we've heard a lot about basic science, for example. And while there's a role, obviously, for those who do pure science, we need in the policy realm people who are not just going to stay on the sidelines and be committed to knowledge production, but are actually going to engage with our policymakers in terms of how we need to move the science from the lab into the real world for people to receive the benefits. And so I think one of the things we need to see is we need to see in these new educational systems, if you will, a commitment to actually have education to develop honest policy brokers, so that we're not just looking at pure scientists or science analysts who are sort of removed from the policy realm, but truly knowledgeable, committed scientists that are there getting their hands dirty working in the policy arena. And the last comment I would make that I think is really important is I think we need to look at this notion of slow science. And there are many of us working on this concept, drawing on the work that's been done around slow food and the slow food movement, and the idea being that we need to take time in order to ensure quality. And that very often, as we heard in earlier remarks, chasing some of the metrics of success doesn't actually necessarily lead to some of the goals we have in terms of promoting the common good. And I think science needs to stay focused on that, which means we need to take time to get better questions and therefore better and more useful answers.
Yes, some of the best findings take years to come out, don't they? And Your Excellency Munir, so significant research and development takes place outside of government-funded science. Does this distort the idea of science as a public good, or is it simply a way of speeding up and broadening the benefits of science?
Thank you for the question, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good morning. And I'd like to start by thanking Her Excellency Professor Rahma for the kind invitation. Very honored to be here today with these esteemed guests and speakers. And for the organizers, for their warm hospitality. They really do make us feel at home. In terms of the question, the role of government would always be very important in driving science, and that historically has never changed. Most of the spillovers of innovation come from different sectors like space and defense, but the role of government evolves as the role of the private sector changes. Now, without the private sector, we will never see decimation of knowledge and transfer of technology from lab to market. So we want to incentivize continuously the private sector to play a major role in innovation. In the Kingdom, when we measured early on in Vision 2030's transformation, the impact of the private sector, we've seen that they contribute roughly 30% to the innovation ecosystem of the Kingdom versus 70% coming from the government. And in our 2040 strategy, we wanted to reverse that. We wanted to see 70% coming from the private sector, not, of course, by reducing the public spend, but by increasing the private sector's contribution. And the risk, of course, that you raised of deviating from solving for humanity's challenges has to be taken into account. The concern for maintaining the investments in basic science has to be, of course, set as a top priority. 50% of our public spend in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is spent on basic science, on curiosity-driven research, and this needs to continue, of course. But there is, of course, a challenge for the private sector to invest in this. So we address this by two ways. One, making sure that part of our innovation strategy looks at existential challenges that not only face the Kingdom, but face the entire world. Things that we've heard of in these keynote presentations related to climate, water, energy, food security, and so on. These existential challenges are being addressed through a mission-oriented approach, where we bring together the private sector with academia, with the demand and spend from the public sector, and create mission control offices where we make sure that the challenges are being addressed, but the solutions are being provided by the scientists bottom up. The second thing is that we've started seeing a shift in the private sector's innovation response to technology evolution. Technologies are moving very fast. The large corporations are not being able to innovate fast enough. So they started outsourcing innovation towards accelerators. And together, between a partnership between the private and public sectors, we started guiding these accelerators with themes that would address both the challenges that we care about from government's perspective as existential issues, but also create value for the private sector to contribute towards. And it's very exciting to see how these accelerators are creating success at a very short pace. They create value from an MVP level all the way to an investment of a sizable value, but these are also global. So some of our international accelerators that took place in the garage in my institution have, in their previous cohort, launched a call for companies to join. Roughly 8,000 companies applied from a global level. They've taken only 80. So you take a very high quality of companies that create value. And what is even more important, we've heard about geopolitics and all the challenges that are happening on a global scale in the keynote presentations. Imagine now that these startups are addressing these challenges because they can scale and operate on a global level much faster than we as governments can react. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. So communication, again, the common theme that keeps coming up. And Salim, our final question that we have time for. So what is the role of the International Science Council then within this increasingly global and polarized environment?
Thanks for that question, Melissa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everyone. As we face a much more complex environment, as the environment gets wrought with tension, as we as society face many challenges, there is a need for us to build global partnerships. Science is not something that is merely done by an individual alone in a laboratory or library. It is now part of the global enterprise, and much of the great discoveries and the new contributions we see come through partnerships. And as we try to build those partnerships, we need the institutions that enable those partnerships to occur. And those partnerships need to occur across disciplines, across race, across geography, across gender. And as we build those partnerships, the ISC is one of the institutions at a global level that is able to create those bridges. And as it does so, it serves our global goal, but it also, at a very fundamental level, helps us achieve the ultimate goals that we're trying to do, which is science for the global good and science in service of humanity.
Thank you. I'm sure we could talk about this for much longer, but in the interest of time, we can go back to our seats now and finish the panel discussion. Thank you so much for your contributions.
قدام الرامل.